The blood in the snow wasn't hers. Not yet. Eleanor Whitmore pressed her palm against the cabin door, feeling the vibrations of approaching horses through frozen wood. Inside, the man they called a killer sat cleaning his rifle. Outside, 6 hired guns circled closer through the blizzard. She'd climbed this godforsaken mountain to find her brother. Instead, she'd found a war. This is a story about survival when civilization abandons you, about trust born in gunfire. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the map. The Bitterroot Mountains didn't care about innocence. Eleanor Whitmore understood this truth as her frozen fingers slipped against the pine bark for the 3rd time in an hour. The climb had become everything, breath burning in her chest, vision narrowing to the next handhold, the next step that might hold her weight or send her tumbling into the white void below. Her dress, once fine wool from a Boston tailor, hung in tatters. Ice crusted the hem in jagged layers. She'd stopped feeling her toes 2 hours ago. That probably meant something bad. The wind screamed across the ridge, carrying snow that cut like broken glass. Eleanor's face had gone numb except for one cheek where tree bark had torn the skin. Blood froze before it could drip. She pressed forward anyway, boots punching through the crust into powder that swallowed her legs to the knee. Behind her, 15 miles of wilderness and 4 days of mistakes. Ahead, maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Her brother's last letter had mentioned mountains. A cabin. A man named Vance who owed Caleb a favor from their army days. The letter had arrived 3 months ago at her boarding house in Philadelphia, forwarded from Boston, then Hartford, then Pittsburgh, as Eleanor ran from one disaster to the next. By the time she'd opened it, the paper had been soft from handling, Caleb's handwriting smudged at the folds. Ellie, if things go wrong, head to the Bitterroots. Find Gideon Vance. He'll know what to do. Things had gone catastrophically wrong. Eleanor's boot hit solid rock instead of snow. She looked up, blinking ice from her eyelashes. Through the swirling white, a dark shape materialized. Not trees, but squared edges. Man-made angles. The cabin. Relief hit so hard her knees buckled. She caught herself against a boulder, breathing in gasps that stabbed her lungs. The structure sat wedged between 2 massive pines, built from logs darker than the surrounding forest. No light showed in the windows. No smoke from the chimney. The place looked abandoned, or worse, waiting. Eleanor had heard the stories in the last town, a miserable collection of buildings called Prospect that clung to existence 20 miles down the mountain. The bartender had laughed when she'd asked about Gideon Vance. "You want the hermit? Lady, that man hasn't come down from his mountain in 4 years, shoots first, asks questions later, if he asks questions at all." The saloon had gone quiet. Men stared into their drinks. "He killed 3 claim jumpers last spring," someone muttered. "Left them where they fell. Wolves took care of the rest." "I heard he was a gunfighter," another voice added. "Colorado Range Wars. Killed 20 men before he disappeared." "I heard 40. The bartender had leaned across the bar, his breath reeking of whiskey and tooth decay. "You really Caleb Whitmore's sister?" Eleanor had nodded, too exhausted to lie. "Then you better hope Vance remembers your brother fondly. Otherwise, you're climbing that mountain to die." She'd left Prospect before dawn, before anyone could stop her or follow her or ask more questions she couldn't answer. The blizzard had caught her at midday, turning the trail into guesswork and prayer. Now she stood 50 feet from the cabin door with no plan except survival. Eleanor forced her legs to move. Each step felt like walking through water. The snow had drifted against the cabin's south wall, nearly burying the lower logs. She circled toward the front, boots crunching on ice that had formed and refrozen in rippled layers. The door was solid timber, built to withstand anything nature could throw at it. Eleanor raised her fist to knock, then hesitated. Her hand trembled. From cold or fear, she couldn't tell anymore. Through the door, she heard nothing. No footsteps. No crackling fire. The windows on either side showed only darkness. She knocked anyway. 3 times, hard enough to hurt her frozen knuckles. Silence. Eleanor waited, counting her heartbeats. 20, 30, 40. "Hello?" Her voice came out cracked and thin, barely audible over the wind. She tried again, louder. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm looking for Gideon Vance. My brother sent me." Still nothing. Panic edged into her chest. She'd gambled everything on this cabin, this man, this impossible climb. If no one was here, if Caleb's information had been wrong. The door opened. Eleanor stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance on the icy ground. A man filled the doorway. Not just large, massive. 6.5 feet of muscle and hard angles packed into a frame that looked carved from the same timber as his cabin. Dark hair hung past his shoulders, shot through with gray. A beard covered half his face, thick and unkempt. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and cold and assessing. He held a rifle, not aimed at her, but ready. They stared at each other for 3 seconds that felt like minutes. Then the man spoke, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "You're bleeding." Eleanor touched her face automatically, felt the frozen blood on her cheek. "It's nothing. It's something." His gaze traveled over her, the torn dress, the inadequate boots, the way she swayed on her feet. "You alone?" "Yes." "Anyone following?" The question made her stomach clench. I don't think so." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in those cold eyes. Calculation. Decision. "Come sit by the fire," he said, and stepped aside. Eleanor didn't move. She'd heard too many stories about what men did to desperate women in places like this, places where screams couldn't carry and bodies disappeared into snowdrifts. The man, Vance, it had to be Vance, seemed to read her hesitation. He lowered the rifle completely, leaning it against the wall inside the door. Then he raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "But you stay out here another 10 minutes. The mountain will finish what it started. Your choice." The wind howled agreement, driving snow into Eleanor's back like frozen needles. She stepped inside. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. Her skin began to burn immediately as blood rushed back to frozen tissue. Eleanor gasped, tears springing to her eyes from the pain. Vance closed the door behind her, cutting off the wind's scream. The cabin fell into sudden, disorienting quiet, broken only by the crackle of fire in a stone hearth. "Sit." He pointed to a chair near the fireplace. "Don't touch the fire yet. You'll blister." Eleanor's legs gave out before she reached the chair. She hit the floor hard, catching herself on her hands. Humiliation burned hotter than the returning circulation. Vance crossed the room in 3 strides and lifted her like she weighed nothing, setting her in the chair with surprising gentleness. Up close, she could see scars on his hands, old and white against weathered skin. A newer injury ran across his knuckles, still pink. "Stay," he ordered, then moved to a shelf built into the wall. Eleanor's vision swam. The cabin spun slowly around her, one room, maybe 20 feet square, with everything precisely placed. The bed in the corner had military corners. Tools hung on the wall in order by size. 3 rifles stood in a rack near the door, cleaned and oiled. Even the firewood was stacked with geometric precision. This was not the lair of a savage mountain hermit. This was the home of a soldier who'd never stopped soldiering. Vance returned with a battered medical kit and a bottle of clear liquid. He set them on a small table, pulled another chair close, and sat facing her. "Let me see your hands." Eleanor held them out. Her fingers had turned an alarming shade of gray-white. Vance examined them carefully, pressing each fingertip and watching the color return. He grunted, apparently satisfied. "No frostbite yet. Lucky." He uncorked the bottle and poured liquid onto a cloth. "This is going to hurt." "What is... but..." He pressed the cloth to the cut on her face. Eleanor hissed through her teeth as fire spread across her cheek. The alcohol, it had to be alcohol, felt like liquid flame against exposed flesh. "Hold still," Vance said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound in quick, confident movements. "Not deep, won't scar if you're careful." Eleanor focused on his face while he worked, trying to reconcile the stories with reality. He looked maybe 40, though the hard life could have aged him. The beard hid most of his expression, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Intelligent eyes, haunted eyes. "How'd you know my brother?" she asked. Vance's hand paused for just a moment. "Fort Laramie, 1876. We served together." "Were you friends?" "No." He applied a second cloth, this one soaked in something that stung less. "But he saved my life during a Sioux raid. Man does that, you remember." "When did you last see him?" Vance sat back, studying her with those winter sky eyes. Why are you here, Eleanor Whitmore? The use of her full name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold. How do you... Your brother wrote me 2 months ago. Vance stood, moving to a chest near the bed. He pulled out a letter, the paper creased from folding. Said if a woman showed up claiming to be his sister, I should help her. Described you down to that stubborn set to your jaw. Despite everything, Eleanor almost smiled. That sounded like Caleb. Vance handed her the letter. She recognized her brother's handwriting immediately. The same bold strokes, the same slight slant to the letters. Gideon, I'm writing because I've made powerful enemies and my sister might pay the price. Eleanor is smart, braver than she knows, and completely unprepared for the kind of men who'll come after her. If she shows up at your door, it means everything went to hell. The railroad magnate Jonathan Ashford framed her for embezzlement from his company. She was his secretary. She trusted him. He used her to hide his own theft, then threw her to the authorities when his partners started asking questions. They seized everything she owned, destroyed her reputation. She ran rather than hang for crimes she didn't commit. I found proof of what Ashford really did. Ledgers showing how he and his associates stole land deeds across 3 territories, bribed government officials, murdered homesteaders who wouldn't sell. The kind of evidence that could hang a dozen powerful men if it reached the right people. I took it, all of it, every document, every record. Now they're hunting me, which means they'll hunt her. Eleanor doesn't know about any of this yet. I've kept her in the dark to protect her. But if she makes it to your mountain, she deserves the truth. I know you don't owe me anything beyond that day at Laramie. I know you came up here to escape this kind of mess. But she's all the family I have left, Gideon. She's good people. The kind who sees a wounded bird and stops to help it, even when she's late for church. Keep her alive. Please. Caleb. Eleanor read the letter twice, her hands shaking. When did this arrive? January 15th. That was 6 weeks ago. She looked up at him. Have you heard from him since? No. The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor's throat tightened. I haven't either. The last letter I received was 3 months ago. He said he was in Montana working as a surveyor. He said everything was fine. He lied. Vance took the letter back, folded it carefully. Your brother was never a good liar, too honest for his own good. The things Caleb wrote about Ashford, about the stolen land, is it true? All of it. Vance moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters at the storm outside. Jonathan Ashford runs the Western Territories Development Company. On paper, he's a legitimate businessman bringing civilization to the frontier. In reality, he's a thief who's stolen more land than most men will ever see. He's got politicians in his pocket from here to Washington, judges, marshals, even a few army officers. How do you know this? Vance's jaw tightened. Because I used to work for men like him. The admission fell between them like a stone into still water. Eleanor stared at his back, at the tension in his shoulders. What did you do? What I was paid to do. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. Scared farmers off their land, broke strikes, made problems disappear. I was good at it too, real good. Why did you stop? Because one day I looked in a mirror and didn't recognize what was looking back. He turned from the window, his expression hard. I came up this mountain to get away from that life, from those men, from what I'd become. Eleanor understood suddenly why he'd isolated himself so completely. This wasn't exile, it was penance. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to bring this to your door. You didn't bring it. It was already coming. Vance crossed back to the fireplace, adding 2 logs with precise movements. The men hunting your brother, they're not going to stop. And if they can't find him, they'll settle for you. Then I'll keep running. Where? He gestured at the storm-covered window. You barely made it up this mountain. You think you'll survive going down? Even if you did, where would you go? Every town between here and California has a telegraph. Ashford's people will find you in days. Eleanor knew he was right. She'd been running for 4 months, ever since the trial that stripped away her old life. Boston to Hartford, Hartford to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to Chicago, Chicago to Omaha. The cities blurred together, each one just another place where she couldn't stay. where people recognized her face from wanted posters or newspaper stories about the Lady Embezzler of Ashford Industries. She'd lost everything: her home, her savings, her reputation. Friends had crossed the street rather than speak to her. The church had asked her not to return. Even her landlady in Boston had demanded she leave, afraid of association with scandal. Caleb had been the only one who believed her, who helped her escape when the marshal came with arrest warrants, and now he was gone too. "I need to find my brother," Eleanor said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "He's all I have left." Vance's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I know. Will you help me?" He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "There's something you need to understand about your brother's situation. The men hunting him, they're not just Ashford's hired thugs. He sent professionals." "What do you mean?" "I mean he hired Silas Crow." The name meant nothing to Eleanor, but the way Vance said it made her skin crawl. "Who is he?" "A killer. One of the best." Vance's hands tightened into fists. "I knew him years ago. We worked the same circuit: mining disputes, range wars, union busting. Crow was the man they brought in when violence wasn't enough, when they needed terror." "You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to prepare you." Vance met her eyes. "Silas Crow doesn't just kill people. He makes them suffer first, makes examples. I've seen him burn families out of their homes with the children still inside. Seen him hang men from bridge supports and leave them for the crows. He enjoys it." Eleanor felt sick. "And this is the man hunting Caleb? And you?" Vance stood, pacing to the window again. "Your brother stole documents that could destroy some of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the West. They're not going to let him live, and they're sure as hell not going to let any witnesses live either." "Then what do I do?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "Just wait here to die? Give up?" "No." Vance turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something besides coldness in his eyes: determination. "You survive. You learn to fight. And when they come, because they will come, you make them regret every step up this mountain." Eleanor wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Her learning to fight? She'd never held a gun in her life, never thrown a punch. She was a secretary from Boston who'd spent her days managing correspondence and her evenings attending charity functions. But then she thought about the past 4 months, the things she'd endured: sleeping in train stations, stealing food when her money ran out, walking 20 miles through a blizzard because she had nowhere else to go. She'd already survived more than the old Eleanor Whitmore would have thought possible. Maybe she could survive this too. "Teach me," she said. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Get some rest first. You're no good to anyone half frozen and exhausted." He gestured toward the bed in the corner. Eleanor looked at it, then back at him. "Where will you sleep?" "I won't." He picked up his rifle, checking the action with practiced ease. "Storm's getting worse. If anyone's foolish enough to be out in this, I'll hear them coming." Eleanor wanted to argue, but her body had reached its limit. She stumbled to the bed, not even bothering to remove her torn dress before collapsing onto the thick wool blankets. Sleep took her in seconds. Mud. She woke to darkness and voices. Not voices. One voice. Vance, speaking low and urgent from somewhere near the door. Eleanor's eyes adjusted slowly. The fire had burned down to coals, casting barely enough light to see by. Through the window, she could see the storm had intensified. Snow pelted the glass in waves. "Don't care what he's paying you. Turn around and go back down." Vance stood with his back to her, rifle aimed at the door. His whole body was tense, coiled like a spring. A man's voice answered from outside, muffled by wind but audible. "We're just looking for a woman. Eleanor Whitmore. You seen her?" Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "Never heard of her," Vance said flatly. "Come on now, Gideon. We tracked her footprints right to your door. She's in there, and we're not leaving without her." "Then you're not leaving at all." A pause. Then laughter, harsh and ugly. "Ashford said you might be difficult. Said you used to be one of us back in Colorado. That true?" "Used to be." "So you know how this works. We've got 6 men out here. You've got 1 rifle and a woman who can't shoot. Do the math." 6 men. Eleanor pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. They'd followed her. Somehow, through the storm and the wilderness, they'd tracked her to this cabin. She'd led them right to Vance's door. "Here's different math," Vance said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "I know every approach to this cabin, every sightline, every piece of cover within 200 yards. You come through that door, you're walking into a killing field. Big talk for an old hermit. Try me." Another pause, longer this time. Eleanor could hear wind, the creak of trees bending under snow weight. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure they could hear it outside. "Mr. Ashford is offering good money," the voice said, trying a different approach. $500 for the woman, alive and unharmed. You help us, you get a cut. Nice retirement money for a man living in the middle of nowhere. Not interested. $1,000, final offer. Not interested. The voice hardened. "Then you're choosing to die for someone you don't even know. That's stupid, Vance, even for you." 3 seconds to start walking down this mountain," Vance said. "Or I start shooting. You're bluffing. 3. Gideon. 2. Eleanor saw Vance's finger move to the trigger. "Wait!" She was on her feet before she realized she'd moved, crossing the cabin in her stocking feet. "Wait, please, don't shoot." Vance's head snapped toward her. "Get back." "They'll kill you," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. 6 against 1. You said it yourself. "I've fought worse odds. Let me go with them. It's me they want." "No." "Why not?" Tears burned her eyes. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything except a debt to my brother, and he's probably already dead. Why would you die for—" "Because your brother asked me to keep you alive," Vance cut her off. "And because I'm done letting men like Ashford and Crow destroy good people." The voice outside called again. "Time's up, Vance. Send her out or we're coming in." Vance met Eleanor's eyes. In the dim firelight, she saw something fierce and unbreakable in his gaze. "Get under the bed," he said quietly. "Stay there no matter what you hear. Understand? I can't let you—" "Under the bed." Each word was steel. "Now." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to do something, anything, except hide like a child while this man fought her battles. But she saw the absolute certainty in his face, and knew argument was useless. She dropped to her knees and crawled under the bed frame just as the first gunshot shattered the night. The cabin window exploded inward, spraying glass across the floor. Vance dove sideways, already firing before he hit the ground. His rifle barked 3 times, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Outside, a man screamed. 5 left, Vance muttered, rolling behind the heavy wooden table. More gunfire erupted, bullets punching through the cabin walls like they were paper. Eleanor pressed her hands over her ears, watching in horror as wood splinters rained down around her hiding spot. Vance moved like liquid violence. He fired through the broken window, lever-action rifle cycling smoothly. Another scream from outside. He was already moving to a different position when return fire chewed up the spot where he'd been. 4. The front door burst open. A man rushed through, pistol raised. He got 2 steps before Vance shot him in the chest. The gunman dropped like a puppet with cut strings. 3. "Get him!" someone roared from outside. 2 more men charged through the door simultaneously. Vance's rifle clicked empty. He threw it aside and drew a pistol from his belt in one smooth motion, so fast Eleanor barely saw it. He shot the first man in the throat. The second got close enough to swing a rifle butt at Vance's head. Vance ducked under it, drove his fist into the man's solar plexus, then shot him in the face when he doubled over. Blood sprayed across the cabin wall. Eleanor bit her fist to keep from screaming. 1. Vance ejected the spent shells, reloaded with practiced speed. For a moment, everything went quiet except for the wind and Eleanor's ragged breathing. Then she heard it. Boot steps on the roof. Someone had climbed up while the others attacked from the front. Vance heard it too. He spun, raising his pistol toward the ceiling just as an axe blade smashed through the wooden planks. The remaining attacker dropped through the hole, landing in a crouch with a hunting knife in each hand. He was massive, nearly as big as Vance, with a face like hammered iron and eyes that held nothing human. "Hello, Gideon," the man said, grinning. "Been a long time." Vance's face went pale. "Crow." Silas Crow stood slowly, brushing roof debris from his coat. "Ashford said you'd gone soft up here, playing hermit. But I told him, I said, Gideon Vance doesn't go soft. He just waits. Get out of my cabin. Or what? You'll shoot me? Crow gestured at the bodies on the floor. You just killed 5 men, 5 more bodies to add to your count. How many is it now? 30? 40? Does it even bother you anymore? Every single one, Vance said quietly. Liar. Crow began circling, knives held loose and ready. You miss it, the rush, the power. That's why you couldn't just hand over the woman. Because deep down, you wanted this. You wanted the excuse. Vance tracked him with the pistol. Last chance. Walk away. Can't do that. Ashford's paying too well. Crow smiled, showing teeth. Tell you what, though. You step aside, let me take the woman. I'll make it quick for you. Clean bullet to the brain. Professional courtesy. No. Then we do this the hard way. Crow moved. He was inhumanly fast. His arm blurred as one knife left his hand, spinning through the air. Vance twisted aside, but not fast enough. The blade caught his left shoulder, punching through muscle. Vance's pistol fired, but Crow was already moving. The bullet sparked off the stone fireplace. Then Crow was on him, the second knife driving toward Vance's throat. Vance caught Crow's wrist an inch from his jugular. The 2 men grappled, locked together with the knife between them. They were evenly matched in size and strength, both breathing hard, both bleeding. You've gotten slow, Crow grunted, forcing the blade closer. You've gotten cocky, Vance replied, and drove his knee into Crow's groin. Crow doubled over with a strangled gasp. Vance grabbed him by the hair, smashed his face into the table's edge. Bone crunched. Blood erupted from Crow's broken nose. But Crow didn't go down. He spun with the impact, his elbow catching Vance in the wounded shoulder. Vance's arm went numb. The pistol clattered to the floor. They fell together, crashing through one of the chairs. Vance's head hit the stone hearth with a sickening crack. His vision wavered, filled with stars. Crow straddled his chest, knife raised high. Blood from his broken nose dripped onto Vance's face. Should have taken the deal, Crow whispered. Under the bed, Eleanor watched Vance losing. Watched the knife start its descent. Watched the man who'd chosen to protect her about to die for that choice. Something broke inside her. Some final restraint, some last vestige of the proper Boston secretary who'd never raised her voice or stepped out of line. She rolled out from under the bed, seized the iron fire poker from beside the hearth, and swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The poker connected with Crow's skull with a sound like a hammer hitting a watermelon. The impact jarred Eleanor's arms to the shoulders. Crow's eyes rolled back. He toppled sideways off Vance, the knife falling from his hand. Eleanor stood there, poker raised for another blow, breathing in great heaving gasps. Blood roared in her ears. Her hand shook so badly the poker's tip rattled against the floor. Vance pushed himself up on one elbow, staring at her in what looked like shock. Is he dead? Eleanor's voice came out high and strange. Vance reached over, checked Crow's pulse. No, but he will be if we don't tie him up quick. He got to his feet with obvious effort, favoring his wounded shoulder. Eleanor noticed he was bleeding from 6 places. The shoulder knife wound, a gash across his ribs, his forehead where he'd hit the hearth. You're hurt, she said stupidly. I'll live. He looked at the unconscious Crow, then at Eleanor, then back at Crow. You just saved my life. You saved mine first. A ghost of a smile crossed Vance's blood-stained face. Fair enough. They worked together to drag Crow into the corner and bind him with rope from Vance's supplies. Eleanor's hands were steadier now, muscle memory from years of precise work taking over. She tied knots the way her father had taught her on his sailboat back in Boston, a lifetime ago. When they finished, Vance collapsed into the one remaining intact chair. Eleanor grabbed the medical kit and brought it to him. I don't know how to treat a knife wound, she admitted. I do. He pulled his shirt off with a wince. The knife had gone through the muscle just below his collarbone. There's a needle and thread in the kit, and more alcohol. Eleanor found both. Her hand started shaking again when she realized what he was asking. I've never stitched a person before. First time for everything. Vance poured alcohol directly into the wound. His jaw clenched, but he didn't make a sound. I'll talk you through it. She threaded the needle with trembling fingers. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside an odd calm had settled. The bodies on the floor, the blood on the walls, The unconscious killer in the corner. It should have been horrifying. Instead, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in months, safe. Not because the danger was over, it wasn't, but because for the first time since Ashford's betrayal, someone had chosen to stand with her instead of against her. She pushed the needle through Vance's torn skin, and he began to teach her how to survive. The needle slipped in Eleanor's grip, tearing through skin instead of closing it. Vance sucked in a sharp breath between his teeth but didn't pull away. "Steadier," he said, his voice tight with pain. "Think of it like embroidery, small, even stitches." "I never embroidered." "What kind of Boston lady doesn't embroider?" "The kind who spent her time keeping ledgers instead of making doilies." Eleanor wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a smear of blood. "Hold still." She tried again, this time managing a passable stitch. The wound was deep, the flesh around it already starting to purple. Blood kept welling up, making it hard to see what she was doing. "How many times have you done this to yourself?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the queasy feeling in her stomach. "Lost count." Vance watched her work with those pale eyes. "First time was a knife fight in Denver. Guy caught me under the ribs. I walked 2 miles to a doctor, bleeding the whole way. He stitched me drunk and charged me $20. "So you learned to do it yourself?" "Cheaper that way." He paused as she pulled another stitch through. "And you don't have to answer questions about how it happened." Eleanor worked in silence for a few more stitches. The firelight cast jumping shadows across Vance's scarred chest. She could see old wounds everywhere. A puckered bullet hole near his heart, long slash marks across his ribs, burns on his left side that looked like someone had held a brand to his skin. "What happened here?" She touched the edge of the burn scar without thinking. Vance's jaw tightened. "Range war. They caught me and 3 other men trying to break a union strike. Tied us to fence posts and used hot irons to make us talk." "Did you?" "No, but the others did. They killed them anyway." His voice had gone flat, distant. "Left me alive as a warning. Turned out to be a mistake on their part." Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. He'd gone back, made them pay for what they'd done. She finished the last stitch and tied it off the way he'd shown her, then cleaned the wound one more time with alcohol. Vance barely flinched, but she saw his knuckles go white where he gripped the chair arm. "You're tougher than you look," he said when she was done. "I've had practice lately." Eleanor stood, her legs unsteady. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and cold despite the fire. "What do we do about him?" She nodded toward Crow, still unconscious in the corner. Blood had dried in a black crust around his broken nose. "We wait for him to wake up," Vance said. "Then we ask him questions." "What if he doesn't answer?" Vance's expression darkened. "He'll answer." Something in his tone made Eleanor's skin crawl. She'd just watched this man kill 5 people without hesitation, fought beside him like they were soldiers in a war. But standing here in the firelight, looking at the cold certainty in his eyes, she realized she didn't really know Gideon Vance at all. "What will you do to him?" she asked quietly. Vance met her gaze. "Whatever I have to. Men like Crow. They don't respond to reason, only to fear." "You mean torture?" "I mean survival." He stood, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Your brother is out there somewhere, probably wounded or hiding or worse. Crow knows where. He knows who else Ashford hired, where they're searching, what their orders are. That information could be the difference between finding Caleb alive or finding him too late." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to say there had to be another way, a better way. But she thought about Caleb, funny, brave Caleb who'd always protected her growing up, who'd taught her to climb trees and catch frogs and stand up to bullies. Caleb who'd believed her when no one else would. If torturing one evil man could save her brother, could she really say it was wrong? The thought terrified her, not because of what it meant for Crow, but because of how easily the justification came. 4 months ago, Eleanor Whitmore had been a woman who attended charity galas and donated to orphanages. Now she was contemplating torture without even flinching. What was she becoming? "I need air," she said abruptly, moving toward the door. Vance caught her arm. "You can't go out there, not with 5 bodies in the snow and a storm that could kill you in minutes." "Then what am I supposed to do? Just stand here and watch you?" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Go to the bed. Rest. You've been through enough tonight." "So have you." "I'm used to it." His grip on her arm gentled, but didn't release. Eleanor, listen to me. What happens next is going to be ugly. You don't need to see it. You don't need that in your head. It's already in my head. She looked at the bodies on the floor, at the blood on the walls, at her own hands still stained red. I can't unsee what I've already seen. I can't unknow what I already know. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded and let her go. At least eat something, he said, moving to a shelf lined with preserved goods. There's jerky and hardtack. Not much, but it'll keep you on your feet. Eleanor hadn't realized how hungry she was until he mentioned food. Her stomach clenched painfully. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Maybe yesterday morning, a stale biscuit she'd saved from Prospect. Vance handed her strips of dried meat and a piece of hardtack that could have doubled as a weapon. Eleanor gnawed on the jerky while he checked the cabin's defenses, testing the shutters and inspecting the hole Crow had chopped in the ceiling. We'll need to patch that before dawn, he muttered. Cold's already coming through. How long until he wakes up? Eleanor asked, nodding toward Crow. Could be minutes, could be hours. Depends how hard you hit him. Vance crouched beside the unconscious man, checking his pupils with professional detachment. Skull's not cracked, but he's got a concussion for sure. As if on cue, Crow groaned. His eyelids fluttered. Vance stood smoothly, drawing his pistol. Stand back. Eleanor retreated to the far wall, her heart suddenly hammering again. She watched Crow's eyes open slowly, confusion giving way to awareness, then rage. You bitch, he slurred, looking at Eleanor. Blood bubbled at his nostrils when he tried to breathe through his broken nose. You broke my fucking nose. Should have broken your skull, Vance said coldly. Would have saved us all some trouble. Crow's gaze swiveled to him. Gideon, should have known you'd still be standing. You always were hard to kill. Unlike your men, all 5 of them went down easy. They were idiots. I told Ashford hiring locals was a mistake. Crow tested his bindings, smiled when they held. Good knots. Who tied them? The secretary? We're going to have a conversation, Vance said, ignoring the question. How it goes depends entirely on you. I'm not telling you shit. We'll see. Vance pulled a chair over and sat backward on it, arms crossed over the back. The casual posture didn't fool anyone. Eleanor could see the coiled tension in his shoulders. Where's Caleb Whitmore? Dead, probably. Or will be soon. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Where? Vance's voice remained level, but his hand tightened on the pistol grip. How should I know? I'm not tracking the brother. That's Dalton's job. Who's Dalton? Crow grinned through bloody teeth. Wouldn't you like to know? Vance stood in one fluid motion and kicked Crow in the ribs, hard. The sound of boot-meeting bone echoed through the cabin. Crow gasped, curling onto his side as much as the ropes would allow. That the best you got? Just getting started. Vance crouched beside him. Marcus Dalton, former Texas Ranger, turned bounty hunter after he got kicked off the force for excessive violence. Tall, scarred face, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. That the Dalton you're talking about? Crow's grin faltered. You know him? Met him once in Colorado. He tried to collect a bounty on a miner I was protecting. I sent him back to Texas with a limp and a message. Vance leaned closer. If that's the man hunting Caleb, then Caleb's in serious trouble, which means you're going to tell me everything you know about Dalton's assignment, where he's searching, what his orders are, how many men he has. Or what? Or I'll make you wish I'd let Eleanor hit you harder. Crow laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. You don't have the stomach for it anymore, Gideon. Everyone knows you went soft. That's why you're hiding on a mountain instead of working. Vance pulled a knife from his boot, not quickly, not threateningly. Just a calm, deliberate motion that was somehow more terrifying than any flourish would have been. Want to test that theory? He asked softly. The laughter died in Crow's throat. Eleanor watched, frozen in place. She told herself she could handle this, that she was strong enough to face whatever came next. But watching Vance transform from the quiet man who'd bandaged her wounds into this cold, dangerous stranger made her question everything. Eleanor, Vance said without looking at her. Last chance to go to the far side of the room. Cover your ears. She should have taken the offer, should have turned away like any sensible person would. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. I'm not leaving, she heard herself say. Vance glanced back at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he turned back to Crow. "Your choice," he said, and pressed the knife tip against Crow's hand. "Wait," Crow said quickly. Wait, I'll talk." "Smart." Vance didn't move the knife. "Start with Dalton. How many men does he have with him?" "4. All experienced trackers." "Where are they searching?" "Last I heard, they were working the Montana territories, Little Blackfoot River area. Your boy Caleb had been spotted near a mining camp there 2 weeks ago." Eleanor's breath caught. 2 weeks. That meant Caleb might still be alive. "What are his orders?" Vance asked. Crow hesitated. Vance pressed harder with the knife, drawing a bead of blood. "Recovery first, elimination second," Crow gasped. "Ashford wants the documents back intact if possible. But if Caleb destroyed them or hid them too well, Dalton's authorized to kill him and move on." "Move on to what?" "To the sister." Crow's eyes found Eleanor across the room. "Ashford figures even if the brother destroyed the evidence, the sister might know where he hid it, or she might be useful as leverage if Whitmore's still alive." "Leverage?" Eleanor repeated numbly. "That's the polite word for it," Crow said. "The reality is a lot uglier." Vance's knuckles went white on the knife handle. "How many other teams does Ashford have in the field?" "3 that I know of, maybe more. He's thrown serious money at this problem." "And your assignment was to grab Eleanor?" "That's right. Bring her back to Boise, let Ashford's people extract whatever information she has, then make her disappear." Crow smiled despite the knife at his hand. "But you fucked that up real good, didn't you? Killed 5 men over a woman you don't even know. Ashford's going to put a bounty on your head so big, every gun in the territories will be coming up this mountain." "Let them come," Vance said quietly. "This mountain's good at making people disappear." He pulled the knife back and stood, leaving Crow bleeding on the floor. Eleanor found her voice. "He said Caleb might still be alive." "Might be," Vance agreed, "but might isn't good enough. We need to know for certain." "How?" "We ask the only person who has the answers." Vance looked down at Crow. "The documents Caleb stole, what exactly was in them?" "How should I know? I'm hired muscle, not a bookkeeper." "Guess." Crow spit blood onto the floor. "Land deeds, property titles, railroad contracts, financial records showing bribes and payoffs. Basically a roadmap of every illegal thing Ashford and his partners have done for the past 5 years. If that information reached the right people in Washington, it would bring down a dozen powerful men. Senators, judges, army officers, the kind of people who don't like being exposed. So it's not just about money," Eleanor said slowly. "It's about power. It's always about power." Crow's gaze sharpened on her. "Your brother didn't just steal evidence. He stole leverage, the ability to destroy careers, ruin reputations, send rich men to prison. That's why they want him dead so badly. And that's why they want you." Eleanor felt sick. Caleb had told her in his letters that he'd found proof of Ashford's crimes, but she'd thought it was simple embezzlement, maybe some accounting fraud. She'd had no idea the conspiracy ran this deep, touched this many people. "Where would he hide it?" Vance asked. "If Caleb knew he was being hunted, where would he stash documents that valuable?" "Hell if I know. I'm not a mind reader. But you've worked jobs like this before, chasing men who stole from powerful people. Where do they usually hide things?" Crow was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Banks are too obvious, same with law offices or government buildings. Too easy to trace, too easy to pressure officials into handing them over. Most runners either bury the evidence somewhere remote or they give it to someone they trust." "Caleb doesn't have anyone he trusts," Eleanor said, "except me, and I haven't heard from him in months." "Then he buried it." Vance started pacing, his tactical mind clearly working through possibilities. Somewhere he could get to quickly if he needed it, but remote enough that no one would stumble across it by accident. "That describes half the territories," Crow pointed out. "You've got millions of acres of wilderness out there. Could be anywhere." Vance stopped pacing. His letter said if things went wrong, Eleanor should come here, to my cabin. So? So maybe he didn't just mean for protection. Vance turned to Eleanor. "Did your brother ever visit you here? Ever mention this mountain specifically?" Eleanor's mind raced back through her memories. Caleb had written her dozens of letters over the past few years as he'd moved around the territories working various jobs. She'd kept them all, tied with ribbon in her trunk back in Boston. Her trunk that had been seized when she'd fled. Letters she could no longer access. But she remembered some of them, bits and pieces. He mentioned the Bitterroots once, she said slowly, maybe a year ago. He said he'd been surveying near here and the mountains reminded him of New Hampshire, where we used to visit our grandmother. Did he say anything else? Any details? Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to pull the memory forward. There was something about a lake? He said he'd found a lake so clear you could see straight to the bottom, with a rock formation that looked like a broken crown. He said it was the most peaceful place he'd ever seen. Vance's expression sharpened. I know that lake. It's about 8 miles north of here, up near the high ridges. You can only reach it in summer when the passes are clear. Summer's 4 months away, Crow said. You planning to wait that long? No. Vance moved to a trunk against the wall and pulled out a detailed map, spreading it on the table. There's another route through the eastern valleys. Harder, takes twice as long, but it stays low enough to be passable even in winter. If someone knew these mountains well, they could reach that lake year-round. Caleb didn't know these mountains, Eleanor said. But I do. Vance traced a route on the map with his finger. And if your brother asked around in any of the towns, someone would have told him about the eastern approach. Question is, would he risk traveling that far in winter? If he was desperate enough, Eleanor said quietly. And if he thought it was the safest place to hide something he couldn't risk losing. Vance studied the map for another moment, then looked at Crow. How long before Ashford realizes you're not coming back? I was supposed to report in 3 days ago. He'll know something's wrong. So we have maybe a week before he sends another team. Less, Crow said. Ashford's not patient, and he doesn't like failures. My guess? He's already got people on the way. Vance folded the map carefully. Then we need to move fast. We? Eleanor stared at him. You're planning to go to this lake? Someone has to, and you can't make that trip alone. I can't make it at all. I barely survived climbing up here. Then you'll have to learn. Vance started gathering supplies, rope, extra ammunition, dried food. We leave at first light. The storm should break by then. That's insane. We don't even know if the documents are there. No, we don't. Vance paused, meeting her eyes. But it's the only lead we have. And if there's even a chance those documents can clear your name and save your brother, we have to take it. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this plan could go wrong. But she saw the determination in Vance's face and realized he'd already made up his mind. What about him? She nodded toward Crow. He stays here, tied up. Vance checked Crow's bindings one more time, making sure they were secure. If we're not back in a week, the cold will finish him. If we are back, we'll decide what to do with him then. You can't just leave me here to freeze, Crow protested. Watch me. Vance turned his back on the bound man and continued gathering supplies. Eleanor moved to help, though she felt completely out of her depth. She'd never been camping, never hiked more than a gentle trail through a city park. The idea of trekking 8 miles through mountain wilderness in winter seemed impossible. But then, 4 months ago, the idea of running from the law had seemed impossible too. The idea of watching men die had seemed impossible. The idea of hitting someone with an iron poker had seemed impossible. She was learning that impossible just meant difficult, and difficult just meant painful. She could handle painful. I'll need different clothes, she said, looking down at her tattered dress. Vance glanced at her, then went to a chest and pulled out spare clothes, wool pants, thick shirts, a heavy coat. These will be too big, but we can make them work. Eleanor took the clothes and moved behind a blanket Vance had hung in the corner for privacy. She changed quickly, fingers clumsy with cold and nervousness. The pants hung loose on her hips until she cinched them with a belt. The shirt swallowed her, but everything was warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. When she emerged, Vance was cleaning his rifles with methodical precision. He looked up, gave her a once-over, and nodded. You'll do. That's not reassuring. Not meant to be. He set the rifle aside and picked up another. This is going to be hard, Eleanor. Probably the hardest thing you've ever done. The terrain's brutal, the weather's unpredictable, and we'll be completely exposed if anyone's tracking us. You need to understand what you're agreeing to. I understand. Do you? He stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. Because if you slow me down, I'll leave you behind. If you can't keep up, you'll die out there. And if we find those documents and they're not what we hoped, we'll have risked everything for nothing. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. My brother risked everything to protect me. The least I can do is risk everything to find him. Something shifted in Vance's expression. Not quite respect, but close to it. All right then, he said quietly. Get some rest while you can. We've got a few hours before dawn. Eleanor started toward the bed, then paused. Vance? Why are you really doing this? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. Your brother asked me to keep you safe, he finally said. But that's not the only reason. Then what is? Because men like Ashford and Crow have been destroying lives for profit as long as I can remember. I spent years helping them do it, working for them, being one of them. He looked down at his scarred hands. I can't undo the things I've done, can't bring back the people I hurt, but maybe I can stop them from hurting you and your brother. Maybe that counts for something. Eleanor understood then. This wasn't just about honoring a debt to Caleb. It was about redemption, about a man trying to balance the scales after years of tipping them toward darkness. It counts, she said softly. Vance nodded once, then went back to cleaning his rifles. Eleanor lay down on the bed, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept racing, thinking about Caleb out there somewhere, alone and hunted. Thinking about the documents that could change everything. Thinking about the journey ahead and all the ways it could end badly. Through the broken ceiling, she could see the storm beginning to break. Stars appeared in gaps between clouds. Across the room, Crow spoke up. You're both going to die out there, you know. Neither Eleanor nor Vance answered. Even if you make it to the lake, even if you find what you're looking for, Ashford will never stop hunting you. He's got resources you can't imagine. Money, influence, men who'll kill for a fraction of what he's paying. Then we'll have to kill them first, Vance said without looking up from his rifle. You can't kill them all. I can try. Crow laughed, that wet, bubbling sound again. You know what your problem is, Gideon? You still think you're one of the good guys, but we both know better. We both know what you really are. This time Vance did look up, his eyes cold as winter ice. Yeah, he said, I know exactly what I am. That's why men like you should be afraid of me. The words hung in the air like a threat. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that come dawn, everything would change again. The cabin had been temporary safety. Tomorrow they'd be back in the wilderness, exposed and vulnerable. But they'd also be moving forward instead of waiting to die. That had to count for something. The fire crackled. Wind whistled through the hole in the ceiling. Somewhere outside, a wolf howled. And Eleanor Whitmore, proper Boston secretary, drifted into uneasy sleep wearing a dead man's clothes and planning to climb a mountain in search of stolen documents that might save her brother's life or get them both killed trying. 4 months ago, she never would have believed any of this was possible. Now it was just another day trying to survive in a world that wanted her dead. Dawn came gray and cold with fog thick enough to choke on. Eleanor woke to Vance shaking her shoulder, his hand rough but not unkind. She'd slept maybe 2 hours, her dreams full of blood and gunfire, and her brother's face disappearing into smoke. Time to move, Vance said. She sat up, every muscle in her body screaming protest. The borrowed clothes smelled like wood smoke and something else she couldn't identify. Her feet felt like blocks of ice inside boots that were 2 sizes too large. Across the room, Crow was awake, watching them with eyes that held nothing but malice. You're really doing this, he said, going after fairy tales while Ashford's people close in. Shut up, Vance said without heat. He handed Eleanor a piece of jerky and hardtack. Eat. We're not stopping until midday. Eleanor forced herself to chew the tough meat, even though her stomach felt like lead. Outside, she could hear wind moving through the pines. Not the howling blizzard of yesterday, but something steadier, more patient. Vance moved around the cabin with economical precision, checking supplies, loading weapons, making sure everything was secured. He'd patched the hole in the ceiling with spare planks and oilcloth. The bodies from last night were gone. Eleanor hadn't heard him move them, but they were no longer on the floor. Where did you— Don't ask questions you don't want answered, Vance said, reading her mind. He handed her a rifle. Eleanor stared at it like it was a snake. I don't know how to use this. You'll learn on the trail. He showed her how to hold it, how to work the lever action, where to put her hands. Keep your finger off the trigger unless you're planning to shoot. And if you do shoot, aim for the biggest part of the target. Forget what you've heard about trick shots. Center mass, every time. Eleanor's hands trembled as she held the weapon. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold even through her gloves. "I've never killed anyone," she said quietly. "You hit Crow hard enough to save my life. That took guts. That was different. That was survival. This is survival, too." Vance slung his own rifle across his back, then added a second pistol to his belt. "The mountains don't care about your morals, Eleanor. Neither do the men hunting us. You either learn to defend yourself or you die. It's that simple." He was right. She hated that he was right, but she couldn't argue with the logic. Vance gathered the last of their supplies: rope, matches, a small pot for melting snow, dried food wrapped in oilcloth. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Eleanor tried to memorize everything he did, knowing her life might depend on these details. "How long will it take to reach the lake?" she asked. 2 days if the weather holds, 3 if it doesn't. Longer if we run into trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind with guns." Vance checked his pistols one more time, then looked at her. "You ready?" Eleanor glanced around the cabin one last time. Despite everything that had happened here, the violence, the blood, the terror, this place had felt safe, protected. Leaving it felt like stepping off a cliff into nothing. "No," she said honestly. "But let's go anyway." Vance's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. He pulled the door open, and freezing air rushed in. "Hey," Crow called out. "You're really going to leave me here?" "That's the plan," Vance said. "I'll freeze or starve, or both. Should have thought about that before you tried to kill us." Vance stepped through the door, then paused and looked back. "If we make it back, maybe I'll let you go." "Maybe. Depends on my mood." "And if you don't make it back?" "Then I guess we'll both be dead, so it won't matter much." Eleanor followed Vance outside, pulling the door shut behind her. The fog was so thick she could barely see 20 feet. Everything was gray and white and silent except for the crunch of snow under their boots. They'd taken maybe 10 steps when Crow's voice drifted through the door, muffled but audible. "You're going to regret this, Vance, both of you." Neither of them responded. The trail down from the cabin was treacherous, ice hidden beneath fresh snow that gave way without warning. Eleanor slipped 3 times in the first 100 yards, catching herself on trees and rocks. Vance moved ahead of her with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew every stone and root. "Keep your weight forward," he called back. "Lean into the slope." Eleanor tried, but it felt wrong, like every instinct was telling her to pull back from the edge. She forced herself to trust his guidance, leaning forward until her center of gravity shifted. It helped, but not much. The fog began to lift as they descended, revealing the valley below in patches. Eleanor could see the route they'd take, a narrow passage between 2 ridges, following what looked like a frozen stream bed. Beyond that, more mountains, ridge after ridge disappearing into distance. 8 miles had never looked so far. They walked in silence for the first hour. Eleanor focused on breathing, on keeping her feet under her, on not falling too far behind. The rifle across her back felt heavier with each step. Her shoulders burned. The cold air sawed at her lungs. Vance finally stopped at a flat section where a fallen tree provided a natural bench. Eleanor collapsed onto it, gasping. "Water," Vance said, handing her a canteen. She drank, the cold water shocking against her teeth. "How much farther?" "We've gone maybe a mile, maybe less." Eleanor's heart sank. At this rate, they'd never make it. "I'm slowing you down," she said. "You're doing fine for someone who's never hiked mountains before." "That's not true. I'm terrible at this." "You're still moving. That's what matters." Vance took the canteen back, drank, then capped it. "Your brother mentioned you in his letters, said you were stubborn as hell, said once you set your mind to something, you'd walk through walls to get it done." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "He said that?" "Those exact words." Vance stood, shouldering his pack. "So stop telling yourself you can't do this. Caleb believed you could." "I'm starting to think he was right. The words shouldn't have mattered. They shouldn't have given her strength. But they did." Eleanor pushed herself up from the log and kept walking. The terrain grew rougher as they left the upper slopes. The frozen stream bed Vance had pointed out turned into a maze of ice-covered rocks and hidden pools of freezing water. Eleanor learned quickly to test each step, to watch where Vance placed his feet and follow exactly. Around midday, the fog burned off completely, and suddenly they could see for miles. The view was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Mountains stretched in every direction, white peaks against blue sky. No roads, no buildings, no sign that humans had ever touched this place. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Vance said. "Terrifying is the word I'd use." "Same thing, out here." He pointed northeast. "That's our route. Through that saddle between the peaks, then along the valley floor. If we're lucky, we'll make the old trapper's cabin by nightfall." "If we're lucky," Eleanor repeated. "What if we're not?" "Then we sleep in the snow and hope we don't freeze." He said it so matter-of-factly that Eleanor couldn't tell if he was joking. They ate while they walked. More jerky, more hardtack that tasted like wood shavings. Eleanor's jaw ached from chewing, but she forced herself to eat anyway. Vance had explained that the cold burned through calories faster than anything else, that stopping to eat meant stopping to stay warm. "Tell me about Colorado," Eleanor said after another hour of silence. "The range wars you mentioned." Vance was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Not much to tell," he finally said. "Miners trying to unionize, mine owners trying to stop them. Both sides hiring men with guns. Which side were you on?" "The side that paid better." His voice had gone flat again. "We'd break up union meetings, beat organizers. Sometimes worse. The owners called it protecting their property. The miners called it murder. They were both right." "Why did you do it?" "Because I was good at it. Because it was easy money. Because I told myself the miners were troublemakers who deserved what they got." Vance stopped walking, stared at the mountains ahead. "You want to know the worst part? I believed it. Actually believed I was doing the right thing." "What changed?" "I saw what I'd become." He started walking again, faster now. "There was this miner. Kid couldn't have been more than 18. He was organizing a strike, giving speeches about fair wages and safe conditions. The owners wanted him gone. So one night, me and two other men grabbed him outside his boarding house. We were supposed to scare him, make him leave town." Vance's hands tightened on his rifle strap. "But the kid fought back, called us cowards, said we were nothing but hired dogs doing the owner's dirty work, said we'd burn in hell for what we'd done." His voice dropped. "One of the other men hit him, just a punch, but the kid went down hard, hit his head on a hitching post. Didn't get back up." Eleanor felt sick. "Did he die?" "No, but he might as well have. Brain damage. Couldn't speak right after that. Couldn't work. Last I heard, his family was caring for him in some charity house back east." Vance looked at her. "That boy was right. We were cowards. We were dogs. And I swore that night I'd never work for men like that again. So you came to the mountains." "So I ran away and hid like the coward I am." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't make me out to be some kind of hero, Eleanor. I'm not saving you because I'm noble. I'm doing it because I can't stand to sit by and watch good people get destroyed anymore." Eleanor understood something then. Vance hadn't come to this mountain to escape the world. He'd come here to escape himself. The isolation wasn't freedom, it was punishment. "You know what I think?" she said carefully. "What?" "I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. A real coward wouldn't have opened his door in the blizzard, wouldn't have fought 5 men to protect a stranger, wouldn't be walking into danger when he could have stayed safe in his cabin. Or maybe I'm just tired of running. Maybe that's the same thing as being brave." Vance glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. But before he could respond, he froze. "Get down," he hissed. Eleanor dropped into a crouch, her heart suddenly hammering. "What is it?" "Tracks. Fresh ones." Vance crouched beside a patch of exposed dirt, studying boot prints that cut through the snow. 2 men, maybe 3 hours ahead of us, moving fast." "Ashford's people?" "Who else?" He stood scanning the terrain ahead with narrowed eyes. "They're heading the same direction we are." "Could be coincidence." "There's no such thing as coincidence when you're being hunted." Vance's jaw tightened. "They know about the lake. Somehow they figured it out." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "How?" "Dalton's a tracker, a good one. If he found any sign of your brother in the territories, he'd backtrack Caleb's movements. Figure out where he'd been, where he might have gone. Vance cursed under his breath. And if Caleb asked anyone in the towns about routes to that lake, word would have gotten around. Dalton would have heard. So they're ahead of us. And they've got maybe a half-day lead. We need to move faster. Eleanor was already exhausted, her legs trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Moving faster felt impossible. But she thought about Caleb out there somewhere, about the documents that could save both their lives, about the men ahead of them who would destroy everything if they got there first. "Let's go," she said. They pushed hard for the next 3 hours, barely stopping. Eleanor's vision narrowed to just the next step, the next breath, the next moment of keeping her legs moving. Vance set a brutal pace, and she matched it through sheer stubbornness. The sun began its descent toward the peaks. Shadows lengthened across the snow. "There," Vance said, pointing. Through the trees ahead, Eleanor could see a structure, barely more than a lean-to, really, with 3 walls and a sagging roof, the trapper's cabin he'd mentioned. They were 50 yards away when Vance grabbed her arm and yanked her behind a boulder. "What?" "Quiet." His hand covered her mouth. "Look at the cabin, the snow around it." Eleanor looked. At first, she didn't see anything unusual. Then she noticed the footprints, dozens of them, circling the structure, coming and going from the trees. "Someone's been here," she whispered. "Recently." Vance pulled his rifle around, checked the load. "Could be the men we're tracking. Could be someone else." "Should we go around? In the dark? On terrain we don't know?" He shook his head. "We need shelter for the night, and I need to know who's been here." "What if they're still inside?" "Then we'll deal with it." Vance handed her his pistol. "You know how to use this?" "You pull the trigger, right?" "Close enough." He positioned her behind the boulder. "Stay here. If you see anyone who isn't me, shoot them." "Vance!" But he was already moving, sliding from cover to cover with liquid grace. Eleanor watched him approach the cabin, rifle ready, every muscle coiled. He reached the door, paused, listened. Then he kicked it open and went in fast. Eleanor held her breath, pistol gripped in both shaking hands. Seconds ticked by like hours. Vance reappeared in the doorway and waved her forward. Eleanor ran, stumbling through the snow. She burst into the cabin and stopped. The interior was a mess. Someone had torn through it, throwing everything around. Broken furniture littered the floor, the small stove was overturned, and on the far wall, scratched into the wood with something sharp, were words. "Whitmore was here." Eleanor's knees went weak. "That's Caleb's handwriting." Vance moved closer to the wall, studying the message. Below it, in smaller letters, was more. "Heading north. If Ellie finds this, don't follow. Too dangerous." "When did he write this?" Eleanor asked. "Hard to say. Week ago, maybe 2. Vance examined the scratches. "The wood's still relatively fresh." "He was here. He was alive." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. 2 weeks ago, he was alive. "Was," Vance said gently. "That doesn't mean—" "I know what it means." Eleanor wiped her face with her sleeve. "But it's more than I had yesterday. It's hope." Vance nodded slowly. "The men who tracked him here, they saw this message too. That's why they're heading north. To the lake. To the lake." Vance looked around the wrecked cabin. "We can't stay here. Too exposed, and whoever tore this place apart might come back." "Then where do we go?" "There's a cave system about a mile east. Less comfortable, but defensible." He started gathering what usable supplies remained. A dented pot, some rope, a few pieces of firewood that hadn't been smashed. "We'll hole up there for the night, then push hard for the lake at first light." Eleanor helped him search, finding a mostly intact blanket and a small knife that someone had missed. As they worked, she noticed dark stains on the floorboards near the door. "Is that— Whoa!" "Blood," Vance confirmed. "Old, but not that old. Someone was hurt here." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Caleb?" "Maybe. Or maybe whoever was chasing him." Vance crouched, examining the stains. "There's not much of it. Probably not fatal, but someone left here wounded." The thought of Caleb injured, bleeding, stumbling through the snow alone made Eleanor want to scream. But screaming wouldn't help, neither would breaking down. She forced herself to keep searching, keep moving, keep focused. They left the cabin as darkness fell, heading east through timber so thick the last light barely penetrated. Vance led them by memory and instinct, moving through the forest like he'd walked it 1,000 times. The cave entrance was hidden behind a tumble of rocks that looked natural but revealed a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, the space opened up into a chamber maybe 15 feet across. The ceiling was low enough that Vance had to duck, but it was dry and protected from the wind. "Home sweet home," he muttered, setting down his pack. Eleanor collapsed against the cave wall, too exhausted to care about comfort. Every part of her body hurt. Her feet were blistered inside the 2 large boots. Her shoulders felt like someone had driven nails through them. Her face was windburned and raw. Vance built a small fire near the entrance, using dead wood he'd gathered on the way. The flames were barely more than embers, giving off minimal light and smoke. He explained they couldn't risk a bigger fire. Too visible, too easy to track. They ate in silence, the last of the jerky, some nuts Vance had stashed in his pack. Eleanor was so hungry, she didn't care that her hands were too cold to feel what she was eating. "Get some sleep," Vance said. "I'll take first watch." "I can help keep watch." "You can barely keep your eyes open." It was true. Eleanor felt herself nodding off even as they spoke. "Wake me in a few hours," she said. "I'm not useless." "Never said you were." Vance settled near the cave entrance, rifle across his knees. "You made it this far. That's more than most people could do." Eleanor pulled the salvage blanket around her shoulders and tried to find a comfortable position against the rock. It was impossible. Everything was hard and cold and wrong, but exhaustion won out over discomfort, and within minutes, she was asleep. She woke to Vance's hand over her mouth and his voice in her ear. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Eleanor's eyes snapped open. The fire had died to nothing. Darkness filled the cave except for faint starlight from the entrance. Outside, she heard voices. "Should have checked this area hours ago." "We did check it. There's nothing here." "Check it again." Dalton said to search every cave, every hollow, every place someone could hide. Bootsteps crunched on snow, coming closer. Vance's hand stayed over Eleanor's mouth. His other hand gripped his pistol. In the darkness, she could barely see his face, but she felt the tension radiating from him. The footsteps stopped right outside the cave entrance. "This one?" "Too small. No one could fit through that gap." Dalton said every cave. A pause. Then, "Fine, but you're the one squeezing through." Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she was sure they could hear it. The cave entrance was narrow, but not impossible. If someone really tried. A scraping sound, someone pushing at the rocks. Vance raised his pistol slowly, aiming at the entrance. Eleanor's hand found the rifle Vance had given her. Her fingers wrapped around it, slick with sweat despite the cold. More scraping, a grunt of effort. "It's too tight, I can't." "Forget it. Even if someone did get through, they'd be trapped in there. We've got bigger areas to search." "You sure?" "I'm sure, come on." The footsteps retreated. Voices faded. Vance kept his hand over Eleanor's mouth for another full minute, listening. When he finally released her, she gasped for air. "How many?" she whispered. "2, maybe 3. Hard to tell." He moved to the entrance, peering through the gap. "They're searching in a grid pattern. Professional." "Dalton's people?" "Has to be." Vance stayed motionless, watching. "They'll be back this way before dawn. We need to be gone before then. It's the middle of the night. Better than being trapped in a cave at sunrise." He moved back to where Eleanor sat, began gathering their supplies. "We can reach the lake by midday if we push, but we'll be moving in darkness, which means slow going." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to say she needed rest, needed warmth, needed just a few more hours of sleep, but the fear in her chest was stronger than the exhaustion. "Let's go," she said. They slipped out of the cave one at a time, moving with exaggerated care. Every sound seemed impossibly loud, the crunch of snow, the rustle of fabric, Eleanor's labored breathing. The forest was pitch black under the tree cover. Vance led them by feel and memory, one hand trailing along tree trunks, testing each step before committing his weight. Eleanor followed so close she kept bumping into him when he stopped. Progress was agonizingly slow. What should have taken minutes stretched into an hour. Eleanor lost all sense of direction. For all she knew, they were walking in circles. Then the trees began to thin. Moonlight filtered through, turning the snow silver. Ahead, Eleanor could see the valley opening up, and beyond it, just visible in the distance, a flat expanse that could only be the lake. "There," Vance whispered. They were close. So close. Behind them, a shout split the night. "Movement! East side!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets slapped into trees around them, spraying bark and wood splinters. "Run!" Vance roared, grabbing Eleanor's arm and hauling her forward. They crashed through the underbrush, all stealth abandoned. More shots. Eleanor felt something tug at her coat sleeve. Then they were in the open, exposed on the snowy slope with nowhere to hide. Vance spun and fired 3 times back at the tree line. Someone screamed, "Keep moving!" He shoved Eleanor ahead of him, providing cover fire. Eleanor ran harder than she'd ever run in her life, legs pumping, lungs burning. The slope fought her, snow grabbing at her boots like hands trying to pull her down. More gunfire. So much gunfire. And then the ground disappeared. Eleanor realized she'd reached the lake's edge only when she broke through the ice and plunged into water so cold it stopped her heart. The shock was total, immediate. Her body tried to gasp and instead pulled in water. She thrashed, disoriented, not knowing which way was up. Strong hands grabbed her coat and hauled her back through the hole she'd made. She emerged coughing, choking, already shaking violently. Vance pulled her onto solid ice, his face grim. "Can you walk?" Eleanor tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. "That's a no." Vance scooped her up like she weighed nothing and started running across the frozen lake surface, his boots finding purchase where Eleanor's had failed. Behind them, men burst from the tree line. 3 of them, spread out, rifles raised. Vance was fast, but not fast enough. Not carrying Eleanor, not on ice. They were going to die out here on this frozen lake, so close to whatever Caleb had hidden that Eleanor could probably see it if she just knew where to look. Then she saw it. The rock formation Caleb had mentioned in his letter. The one that looked like a broken crown. It jutted from the ice maybe 100 yards ahead, dark stone against white snow. "There!" she managed through chattering teeth. "The rocks!" Vance saw it too. He changed direction, angling toward the formation. A bullet pinged off the ice next to them. 50 yards. 40. More gunfire. Vance grunted but didn't slow. 30 yards. "Can you stand?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. He set her down behind the rocks. The formation was hollow inside, forming a natural shelter. And there, wedged into a crack in the stone, was a metal box. Caleb's lockbox. Eleanor's frozen fingers scrabbled at it, pulling it free. It was heavy, secured with a combination lock. "Can you open it?" Vance asked, already positioning himself to return fire. "I don't know the combination." "Try your birth date, try his, try anything." Eleanor's hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the dial. She tried her birthday. Nothing. Caleb's birthday. Nothing. Gunfire intensified. Vance was firing methodically, making each shot count, but there were 3 of them, and 1 of him, and they were advancing steadily across the ice. Eleanor tried random numbers. Her parents' anniversary, the address of their childhood home. Nothing worked. "Eleanor," Vance said, his voice tight, "we're running out of time." Then she remembered something, a stupid thing from childhood. Caleb had always said if they ever needed a secret code, they'd use the date they'd found their dog, a stray that had wandered into their yard when Eleanor was 8 and Caleb was 10. August 14th. She spun the dial. 8:14. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents, dozens of them. Land deeds, contracts, ledgers filled with numbers and names. Everything Ashford had tried to hide. Everything that could destroy him. "Got it!" Eleanor shouted. "Then we're leaving." Vance fired twice more, then grabbed her arm. "Stay low and move when I say." He fired 3 times in rapid succession. During the momentary cover, they ran. Not back the way they'd come. That would mean running straight at their attackers. Instead, Vance pulled her along the lake's edge, using the terrain for cover, zigzagging between rocks and ice formations. The men behind them gave chase. Eleanor could hear them shouting, coordinating, closing in. Vance led them to the far side of the lake where the shore rose steeply. They scrambled up the embankment, grabbing at roots and rocks. Eleanor's wet clothes were already freezing solid. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. They reached the top and Vance pulled her into the trees. "Keep running," he said. "Straight ahead. Don't stop." "What about you?" "I'm right behind you. Go." Eleanor ran, clutching the lockbox to her chest. Behind her, she heard Vance's rifle bark 3 times, then silence. She wanted to look back, wanted to make sure he was following, but she kept running because that's what he told her to do, and because stopping now would make everything they'd been through meaningless. The forest swallowed her. Darkness pressed in from all sides. And Eleanor Whitmore, soaking wet and half frozen, stumbled through the wilderness alone, carrying documents that could change everything, if she survived long enough to use them. Eleanor made it 20 yards before her legs gave out. She crashed into the snow, the lockbox flying from her frozen hands. Her body refused to respond to commands anymore. The wet clothes had turned to ice against her skin. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't catch her breath, couldn't make her fingers close around the metal box when she reached for it. Behind her, gunfire echoed through the trees. 3 shots. A pause. 2 more. Then silence. Eleanor tried to call out for Vance, but her throat wouldn't work. She managed to get to her hands and knees, crawling toward the lockbox. Her vision kept blurring, everything turning gray at the edges. Hypothermia. She recognized it from a lecture she'd once attended about winter survival. The speaker had been some Arctic explorer with frostbitten fingers and stories about men who'd frozen to death within sight of shelter. She was going to die out here, 10 feet from the documents that could save her life, and she was going to freeze to death because she'd fallen through ice like an idiot. Eleanor's hand closed around the lockbox. She pulled it against her chest and tried to stand, made it halfway up before her knees buckled again. "Come on," she whispered to herself. "Come on, you stubborn—" A hand grabbed her arm. Eleanor screamed, or tried to. What came out was more of a croak. "Easy." Vance's voice. "It's me." She turned her head, and there he was, breathing hard, a fresh cut across his cheek bleeding down into his beard. He was favoring his left leg. "Did you? 2 of them won't be following us. The 3rd ran." Vance pulled her to her feet, took one look at her shaking body, and cursed. "How long were you in the water?" Maybe 30 seconds? That's 30 seconds too long." He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders over her frozen one. "We need to get you warm. Now." "The cabin. Too far. You'll be dead before we're halfway there." Vance scanned the forest, his tactical mind clearly working through options. "There. See that fallen pine?" Eleanor followed his gaze to a massive tree that had toppled at some point, its root ball creating a natural shelter. "Can you walk?" She tried, made it 3 steps before stumbling. Vance caught her, then simply picked her up again. Eleanor wanted to protest, wanted to say she could manage on her own, but she was too cold to form words anymore. He carried her to the fallen tree and set her down in the protected space beneath the root ball. The ground here was relatively dry, sheltered from snow by the massive roots and earth above them. "Stay here," Vance ordered, then disappeared. Eleanor hugged the lockbox to her chest and focused on breathing. In and out, in and out. The shaking was getting worse, her whole body convulsing in waves. Vance returned with an armload of dead branches and pine needles. He worked with rapid efficiency, clearing a space, arranging kindling, striking sparks with flint and steel until a tiny flame caught. He nursed it carefully, adding twigs and then larger branches until he had a real fire going. "Clothes off," he said. Eleanor stared at him through chattering teeth. "You're soaked. That water's pulling heat from your body faster than anything else." He turned his back to her. "I won't look. But you need to get dry right now, or you will die. Understand?" Eleanor's frozen fingers fumbled with the buttons on her shirt. They wouldn't cooperate. She managed to get 2 undone before giving up. "I can't. My hands—" Vance turned back around. "Permission to help?" She nodded, too desperate to care about modesty. He worked quickly and clinically, stripping off her frozen shirt, the soaked pants, leaving her in just her undergarments. Then he wrapped her in both their coats and his spare blanket, positioning her as close to the fire as possible without scorching the fabric. "Better?" he asked. Eleanor's teeth were still chattering too hard to answer, but she managed a nod. Vance hung her wet clothes on branches near the fire, then checked the cut on his cheek. It was still bleeding sluggishly. "You're hurt," Eleanor managed to say. "I've had worse." He pressed snow against the wound to clean it. The third man, the one who ran, his name was Dalton. I recognized him. The bounty hunter. The same. Vance's expression darkened. He saw me. Saw you. He knows we have the documents now. Will he come back? Not alone. He'll go get reinforcements. Vance added more wood to the fire. We've got maybe 12 hours before this place is swarming with Ashford's men. Eleanor looked down at the lockbox sitting beside her. They'd risked everything for this. Men had died for it, and now that they had it, she realized she had no idea what to do next. "What's in there?" Vance asked, nodding at the box. "I haven't looked yet. My hands—" She held them up. They were still shaking, fingers white and clumsy. "Let me." Vance took the box and opened it carefully. He pulled out the oilcloth bundle and unwrapped it, revealing stacks of documents. Eleanor leaned closer to the fire, trying to read by the flickering light. The first page was a land deed for property in Montana Territory. The signature at the bottom belonged to a homesteader named William Chen. But there was a second signature, Jonathan Ashford's, dated 3 months after Chen's death. "Forgery," Vance said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "Ashford claimed the land after the owner died, made it look legitimate." The next document was similar. And the next. Page after page of fraudulent claims, stolen deeds, forged signatures. Then came the ledgers. Eleanor had kept books for Ashford for 2 years. She knew his handwriting, recognized his accounting methods. These ledgers detailed everything: bribes paid to government officials, money funneled to judges, payments to hired guns for security services that clearly meant something much darker. One entry made her blood run cold. Payment to S. Crow, $500. Union organizer removal, permanent. She looked up at Vance. This is a record of a murder. It's a record of dozens of murders. Vance flipped through more pages, his face grim. Ashford didn't just steal land. He eliminated anyone who stood in his way, and he documented every penny he spent doing it. Why would he keep records like this? Insurance, probably. Something to hold over his partners' heads if they ever turned on him. Vance set the documents down carefully. Your brother found evidence that could hang a dozen powerful men, senators, railroad executives, judges. No wonder they want him dead. Eleanor thought about Caleb, about the risk he'd taken stealing these documents, about the target he'd painted on his own back trying to save her. "The message in the cabin," she said. "He told me not to follow. He knew how dangerous this was." "He underestimated you." Vance met her eyes. "Most people would have run the other direction, gone east, changed their name, tried to disappear. I tried that. It didn't work." "Because you're not most people." Vance added another log to the fire. "Your brother saw that? So did I, the moment you hit Crow with that poker instead of hiding under the bed." Eleanor felt heat rising to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. She pulled the coats tighter around herself. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We can't just walk into the nearest town with these documents. Ashford has people everywhere." "No, we can't." Vance stared into the flames, thinking. "We need to get them to someone Ashford can't touch, someone with enough power to actually do something with this evidence." "Who?" "Federal marshal, maybe. Or a territorial judge who's not on Ashford's payroll." He paused. "There's a man in Helena, Judge Aaron Blackwood. I knew him years ago before he got appointed to the bench. He's honest, stubborn, doesn't bend for money or threats." "You trust him?" "As much as I trust anyone." Vance looked at her. "Helena's a week's ride from here, minimum, and that's if we don't run into trouble." "We'll run into trouble. Definitely." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "But we've handled trouble before." Eleanor thought about the past few days. The climb to the cabin. The fight with Crow's men. The trek to the lake. Every impossible thing she'd survived. "When do we leave?" she asked. "At first light. You need to rest first, get your strength back." Vance checked her hands, examining her fingers for frostbite. "You're lucky, no permanent damage. But you need to stay warm tonight." He positioned himself on the other side of the fire, rifle across his lap, clearly settling in for watch duty. "Vance?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for coming back for me. At the lake, you could have what? Left you to freeze?" He shook his head. I told your brother I'd keep you safe. I don't break promises. It's more than that, Eleanor said quietly. You've risked your life a dozen times over for someone you barely know. That's not just keeping a promise, that's… She didn't know how to finish the sentence, didn't have words for what she was feeling. Vance was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I spent years working for men like Ashford, hurting people, destroying lives. I told myself I was just following orders, just doing a job. He looked down at his scarred hands. But that's bullshit. I made choices. I chose money over morality, power over people. You're not that person anymore. Maybe not, but I can't undo what I did, can't bring back the people I hurt. He met her eyes across the fire. Helping you and your brother, maybe that doesn't balance the scales. Maybe nothing ever will. But at least it's something. At least it's choosing the right side for once. Eleanor understood then. This wasn't just about redemption. It was about reclaiming himself from the man he'd been, about proving he could be more than the violence that had defined him. You're a good man, Gideon Vance, she said. He looked away. Don't know about that. I do. The fire crackled between them. Outside their shelter, wind moved through the pines with a sound like the ocean. Stars appeared in gaps between clouds. Eleanor felt herself drifting towards sleep despite everything. The warmth of the fire, the exhaustion in her bones, the knowledge that for the first time in days, she wasn't actively running for her life. Eleanor, Vance said softly. She forced her eyes open. Your brother, the message he left at the cabin. He told you not to follow. I know. But you came anyway, even knowing it was dangerous, even knowing you might not find him alive. Vance's expression was unreadable in the firelight. Why? Eleanor thought about Caleb, about growing up together, about the way he'd always protected her from bullies, about the time he'd taken the blame when she'd broken their mother's favorite vase, about how he'd been the only person who believed her when Ashford destroyed her life. Because he's my brother, she said simply. And because he would have done the same for me. Vance nodded slowly. He's lucky to have you. If he's still alive to appreciate it. He is. Vance said it with such certainty that Eleanor almost believed him. Men like your brother, stubborn, smart, resourceful, they don't die easy. Dalton's good, but Caleb's had weeks to prepare, to hide, to stay ahead. He's out there somewhere. And once we get these documents to Judge Blackwood, we'll have the leverage to bring him in safely. Eleanor wanted to believe it, wanted to think they'd find Caleb alive and well, that they'd expose Ashford's crimes, that everything would somehow work out. But she'd learned over the past 4 months that happy endings were rare, that survival was the best you could usually hope for. Get some sleep, Vance said. I'll keep watch. Wake me in a few hours. You need rest too. I will. Eleanor knew he was lying. He wouldn't wake her, would sit guard duty all night to let her recover. But she was too tired to argue. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. She dreamed of Caleb. Not the Caleb from his letters, worn down and hunted, but the Caleb from childhood, teaching her to skip stones across the pond behind their house, sneaking her sweets from the kitchen when their mother wasn't looking, reading to her by lamplight when she was scared of thunder. In the dream, he looked at her and smiled. I knew you'd come, he said. I knew you wouldn't give up. Eleanor woke to gray dawn light and the smell of pine smoke. Vance was exactly where she'd left him, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the forest. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but alert. Anything? Eleanor asked, her voice rough from sleep. Quiet night. Too quiet. He stood, stretching stiff muscles. How do you feel? Eleanor took inventory. Her body ached everywhere. Her hands were still tender, and she was pretty sure she'd developed blisters on top of her blisters. But she was alive, warm, functional. I'll live, she said. Good enough. Vance kicked snow over the fire, extinguishing it completely. Get dressed. We need to move. Eleanor's clothes had dried by the fire overnight. They were stiff and uncomfortable, but warm. She dressed quickly behind the root ball while Vance packed their supplies. When she emerged, he handed her a piece of hardtack and the last of their jerky. Breakfast of champions, he said dryly. I've had worse. Eleanor forced herself to eat, even though her stomach rebelled. What's the plan? We head southeast away from the lake. Put some distance between us and Dalton's people. Once we're clear, we'll swing south toward the mining camps. We can resupply there, maybe buy horses. With what money? Vance pulled out a small leather pouch and shook it. Coins rattled inside. I'm not completely unprepared. They set out as soon as Eleanor finished eating. The terrain here was slightly easier than yesterday's march, less steep, the trees more spread out. But Eleanor was operating on maybe 4 hours of sleep and a body that had been pushed past its limits. She stumbled twice in the first hour. I'm slowing you down, she said. You're doing fine. I'm not. You could move twice as fast without me. Vance stopped walking and turned to face her. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Eleanor blinked, surprised by the question. I see someone who climbed a mountain in a blizzard when most people would have frozen to death. Someone who stitched up a gunshot wound with shaking hands. Someone who hit a trained killer over the head to save my life. His pale eyes were intense. You think you're weak because you're tired. I think you're the toughest person I've met in years. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I don't feel tough. Nobody does. That's the secret. Vance started walking again. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. They walked in silence for another hour. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning fog. Eleanor's legs fell into a rhythm. Step, breathe, step, breathe. Don't think about the distance ahead. Just focus on the next step. Around midday, they reached a stream cutting through the forest. The water ran fast and clear, not yet frozen despite the cold. Fill the canteens, Vance said, and drink as much as you can. We might not find water again for a while. Eleanor knelt by the stream, cupping water in her hands. It was so cold it made her teeth ache, but it tasted clean and pure. She drank until her stomach sloshed, then filled both canteens. When she stood, she noticed Vance had gone very still. He was staring across the stream, his hand on his rifle. What is it? Eleanor whispered. Tracks. Fresh. Maybe an hour old. He pointed to boot prints in the soft mud on the far bank. 3 men, moving fast. Dalton? Probably. Vance studied the tracks, reading them like a book. They're heading southeast, same direction we are. Eleanor's stomach clenched. They're ahead of us. Looks that way. Vance cursed softly. They must have circled around during the night, trying to cut off our escape route. So what do we do? Vance thought for a moment, his tactical mind working through options. We can't go southeast anymore. That puts us right in their path. We'll have to swing west, add another day to the journey. A day we might not have. I know. His jaw tightened, but walking into an ambush is worse. They changed course, following the stream west for a mile before cutting back into the forest. The detour added rough terrain, more rocks, steeper slopes, dense underbrush that grabbed at their clothes. Eleanor's exhaustion deepened with each hour. Her vision started to blur. She caught herself stumbling over nothing, her body forgetting how to coordinate movement. I need to rest, she finally admitted. Vance checked the sun's position. 10 minutes. That's all we can spare. Eleanor collapsed against a tree trunk. 10 minutes felt like nothing, like trying to quench thirst with a single drop of water. Vance handed her the canteen. Small sips. Don't make yourself sick. She drank, then leaned her head back against the bark and closed her eyes. Tell me about Boston, Vance said. Eleanor's eyes opened. What? Your life before all this. What was it like? It felt like talking about a different person. The Eleanor who'd lived in Boston, worked for Ashford, attended charity galas. She seemed like someone from a story Eleanor had read long ago. Boring, she said. I kept books for Ashford's company, lived in a boarding house on Commonwealth Avenue, went to church on Sundays, had tea with friends on Wednesday afternoons. Sounds peaceful. It was lonely. The admission surprised her. Everyone thought I had everything together. Good job, nice clothes, respectable life. But I felt like I was playing a part, like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Who were you pretending to be? Someone who belonged, someone who fit in. Eleanor looked down at her borrowed clothes, her blistered hands, her mud-caked boots. Turns out I'm better at surviving than I ever was at fitting in. Maybe that's who you really are, a survivor. Maybe. Eleanor stood, ignoring her protesting muscles. Time's up. Let's keep moving. They pushed through the afternoon, the sun tracking across the sky. Eleanor's mind drifted into a strange place between consciousness and something else. She walked without thinking, one foot in front of the other, breathing and moving and existing without any higher thought. She barely noticed when the trees began to thin. Vance grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a boulder. "What?" she started to say. "Look." He pointed down the slope. Through the trees, maybe a quarter-mile away, Eleanor could see buildings. A mining camp, ramshackle structures clustered around what looked like a main shaft operation. Smoke rose from several chimneys. She could hear the faint sound of voices, the clang of metal on rock. "That's our resupply point," Vance said. "But we need to be careful. Camps like this, word travels fast. If anyone recognizes us from wanted posters, we'll have a whole town on our heels. Can we go around?" Not without adding 2 more days to the journey. Vance studied the camp through narrowed eyes. "We'll wait until dark, slip in, buy what we need, slip out. No one needs to get a good look at us." They found a hollow in the rocks with a view of the camp and settled in to wait. The sun seemed to crawl across the sky. Eleanor's stomach growled. They'd run out of food hours ago. "When this is over," she said, I'm going to eat an entire cake, maybe 2. Vance smiled slightly. "What kind?" "Chocolate. With thick frosting, the kind you can only eat 1 slice of without feeling sick." "Ambitious. I've earned it." Eleanor watched the camp below. "What about you? What's the first thing you'll do when this is over?" Vance was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I haven't thought past keeping you alive." "Think past it." "Why?" "Because hope is important, even if it's just hope for cake and a hot bath." Vance looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "All right, when this is over, I'm going to sleep for 2 days straight in a real bed, with real pillows, and then I'm going to have a steak so big it hangs off both sides of the plate." Eleanor laughed. The sound felt strange. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed about anything. "That's a good plan," she said. "Yeah." Vance's gaze drifted back to the camp. "If we live long enough to do it." Darkness finally fell, and with it came new cold. Eleanor's breath plumed white in the air. Her fingers were going numb again, despite her gloves. "Ready?" Vance asked. Eleanor checked the lockbox tucked inside her coat, making sure it was secure. Everything they'd fought for, everyone who'd died, it all came down to keeping these documents safe. "Ready," she said. They descended toward the camp, moving carefully in the darkness. Lights flickered in windows. Eleanor could smell cooking food, beans and bacon, making her mouth water. Vance led them around the edge of the camp to a building with a sign that read, "Supply." Through the dirty window, Eleanor could see shelves stocked with goods. "Stay close," Vance murmured. "Let me do the talking." They pushed through the door into warmth and light. A man behind the counter looked up, middle-aged, balding, wearing a stained apron. "Help you?" he asked. "Need supplies," Vance said, his voice carefully neutral. "Food, ammunition, maybe blankets if you've got them." The man's eyes traveled over them, taking in their dirty clothes, their worn-out appearance. His gaze lingered on Eleanor. "You two come far?" he asked. "Far enough," Vance said. "How much for 10 pounds of dried goods and a box of rifle cartridges?" The man named a price. Vance counted out coins from his pouch. While they waited for the man to gather supplies, Eleanor noticed other people in the store, 2 miners examining tools, a woman selecting fabric. All of them were stealing glances at Vance and Eleanor. "That's them," someone whispered. "I'm sure of it." Eleanor's heart began to race. The man behind the counter set their supplies on the counter, then casually reached under it. When his hand came back up, he was holding a revolver. "You're Eleanor Whitmore," he said. "There's a $1,000 bounty on your head." Everything happened at once. Vance's hand flashed to his pistol. The miners dove for cover. The woman screamed. "Don't," Vance said quietly, his gun aimed at the shopkeeper's chest. "We're not looking for trouble. We just want supplies." $1,000, the man repeated, but his hand was shaking. "That's more money than I'll see in 5 years working this claim." "It's also more money than you'll spend if you're dead." Vance's finger rested on the trigger. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to put that gun down. We're going to take our supplies and leave. And you're going to forget you ever saw us. Everyone lives. Everyone's happy. Or you could just take the supplies and shoot us anyway. I could, Vance agreed, but I won't. Not unless you make me. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Eleanor could barely breathe. Finally, slowly, the shopkeeper set his revolver on the counter. Smart choice, Vance said. He gathered the supplies one-handed, keeping his gun trained on the room. Eleanor, the door. She opened it, cold air rushing in. They backed out together, Vance covering their retreat. Once they were outside, they ran. Behind them, someone shouted. Then gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up snow around their feet. Eleanor and Vance sprinted into the darkness, leaving the camp and its lights behind, running toward the forest and safety, and another night of survival in the wilderness. The lockbox bounced against Eleanor's chest with each step. They'd gotten supplies. They were still alive, that's all that mattered. But now the whole camp knew they were here. And by morning, everyone in the territory would know which direction they'd gone. The net was closing in. They ran until Eleanor's lungs felt like they'd been scraped raw from the inside. Vance pulled her into a ravine thick with deadfall and underbrush, where they collapsed against the frozen earth, gasping. How many? Eleanor managed to ask between breaths. Vance listened, head cocked. Distant shouts echoed through the trees, maybe 4 voices, maybe more. Enough, he said grimly. He checked his ammunition, reloaded his pistol with practiced hands. They'll organize a search party, probably already sending riders to the nearest telegraph office. So Ashford will know exactly where we are by morning. He'll know where we were. We won't be here by then. Vance shouldered the supply pack. Can you keep moving? Eleanor's body screamed no. Every muscle felt torn, every joint ground to powder. But she thought about the lockbox pressed against her ribs, about Caleb somewhere out there, about the alternative to moving forward. Yes, she said, and pushed herself upright. They traveled through the night, stumbling over roots and rocks they couldn't see, navigating by starlight and Vance's instinct. Eleanor fell twice, catching herself on her hands, pushing back up without complaint. Pain had become something distant, background noise she could ignore. Around midnight, they found an overhang that provided minimal shelter. Vance insisted they rest for 2 hours. He rationed out food from their new supplies, dried beef, hardtack, and a luxury Eleanor hadn't tasted in weeks, coffee. We can't risk a fire, Vance said, handing her the cold beans he'd opened with his knife. But once we're clear, I'll make you the best damn coffee you've ever had. Eleanor ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Tell me about Judge Blackwood. How do you know we can trust him? I testified in his court once, years ago, a mining dispute that turned violent. I was working for the company, told the truth about what happened, even though it meant my bosses lost the case. Vance stared into the darkness. Blackwood pulled me aside after, asked me why I'd tell the truth when lying would have made me more money. I told him I was tired of being a liar. What did he say? He said any man who could admit that was capable of being better. Vance's voice softened. First time in years someone had looked at me and seen potential, instead of just a killer for hire. Did you see him again? A few times. He tried to talk me into giving up that life, finding honest work. I wasn't ready to hear it then. Vance looked at her. Maybe I'm ready now. Eleanor wanted to say something meaningful, something that would acknowledge what he was offering, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. Vance looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression, some wall crumbling. When this is over, he said quietly, what will you do? I don't know. I haven't had a home in months, no job, no money, no reputation worth saving. Eleanor tried to smile, but it came out shaky. I'll probably end up working in some factory under a fake name, living in a boarding house where nobody asks questions. That sounds lonely. It is lonely. That's what running does. It isolates you, turns you into someone who can't trust anyone, can't put down roots, can't... She stopped, overwhelmed suddenly by the magnitude of what Ashford had stolen from her. Not just her reputation or her possessions. He'd stolen her ability to be a person in the world. You could come back to the mountain, Vance said. Eleanor looked at him, surprised. It's quiet up there. Safe. Nobody bothers you because nobody can find you. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I've been alone a long time. Thought I wanted it that way. But these past few days, having someone to... He paused, seeming to struggle with words. It's been good. Having you there. Eleanor's throat tightened. Gideon, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. He released her hand and stood. We should keep moving. 2 hours is all we can spare. They walked through what remained of the night, through the gray pre-dawn, into morning light that turned the snow to gold. Eleanor's mind kept circling back to Vance's offer. The mountain. Safety. A place to stop running. But was that living or just a different kind of hiding? Around mid-morning, they crested a ridge and Vance stopped so abruptly Eleanor nearly ran into him. What? Riders, he said, pointing down the slope. 4 of them, coming fast. Eleanor's stomach plummeted. Through the trees below, she could see horses kicking up snow, men urging them forward. Can we outrun them? Not on foot. Vance scanned the terrain, his tactical mind working. There. That rock formation. It's defensible. They ran for the rocks, a tumble of boulders that formed a natural fortress. Vance positioned Eleanor behind the largest stone and took up position with a clear sightline down the approach. How many bullets do we have? Eleanor asked, checking her rifle with shaking hands. Enough, maybe. Vance's face was grim. But they've got horses and numbers. This could get ugly. The riders came closer. Eleanor could see them now through gaps in the rocks, hard men with rifles and determined expressions. Ashford's people, without question. Eleanor Whitmore, one of them shouted. We know you're up there. Hand over the documents and we'll let you walk away. They're lying, Vance said quietly. I know. Last chance, the rider called. Joss, throw down the lockbox and surrender. Nobody else has to die today. Eleanor thought about all the people who'd already died. The men at Vance's cabin, the gunmen at the lake, the shopkeeper who might have been killed when they fled the mining camp. How much blood had been spilled for the papers pressed against her chest? What if I give it to them? She said. Vance's head snapped toward her. You can't be serious. Maybe it would end this. Maybe they'll kill us both the moment you hand it over. You know that. Eleanor did know, but the weight of all this death, all this violence, was crushing her. How many more people have to die? She asked. How many more? Gunfire erupted. A bullet spanged off the rock inches from Eleanor's head, spraying stone chips across her face. Get down! Vance roared, returning fire. The battle was brief and brutal. The riders had numbers, but Vance had position and skill. He picked off one horse, sending the rider tumbling, wounded another man who screamed and fell from his saddle, but then one of them flanked around the side, coming in from an angle Vance couldn't cover. Eleanor saw him first. She raised her rifle, remembering everything Vance had taught her. Center mass, breathe out, squeeze, don't pull. She fired. The man jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to send him scrambling for cover. Nice shooting, Vance said, genuine approval in his voice. The remaining riders pulled back, regrouping. Eleanor could hear them arguing, debating their next move. We need to leave, Vance said. Now, while they're disorganized. The horses, one of them still standing. Come on. They ran down the slope while the riders were still scattered. Vance reached the riderless horse first, a bay gelding wild-eyed with fear. He calmed it with a touch and a low voice, then lifted Eleanor into the saddle and swung up behind her. Hold on, he said, and kicked the horse into a gallop. Behind them, the riders shouted and gave chase. But they'd lost their advantage, and Vance knew the terrain better. He guided the horse through narrow gaps between trees, across frozen streams, up slopes that made Eleanor's stomach drop. They rode for 2 hours straight before Vance finally slowed, convinced they'd lost their pursuers. Eleanor slid from the saddle on trembling legs. Her whole body felt battered from the hard ride. But they were alive. They'd survived another encounter. How much farther to Helena? She asked. 2 days on horseback if we push hard, 3 to be safe. Vance dismounted, checking the horse's legs for injury. But word's spreading fast. Every bounty hunter and hired gun in the territory is going to be looking for us. So we have to get there first. We have to get there alive. Vance looked at her seriously. Eleanor, this is about to get worse. A lot worse. Ashford's going to throw everything he has at stopping us from reaching Blackwood. If you want to turn back, I'm not turning back. Then you need to understand what you're agreeing to. We might not make it. Probably won't, if I'm being honest. The odds are, I don't care about the odds. Eleanor pulled the lockbox from inside her coat and held it up. This is everything. Evidence that can destroy the men who've been destroying people for years. If we don't get it to someone who can use it, then everyone who died for it died for nothing. And I can't let that happen. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right then, he said. We ride until we can't ride anymore. And when we get to Helena, we finish this. They mounted again and rode south through country that grew progressively rougher. The horse was a good animal, strong and sure-footed, but Eleanor could feel it tiring under their combined weight and the relentless pace. As sunset approached, they found a shepherd's hut abandoned for the winter. It was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a fireplace and protection from the wind. Vance built a small fire while Eleanor tended the horse, using skills she'd learned watching him. She unsaddled the animal, rubbed it down with handfuls of dry grass, made sure it had access to water from a nearby stream. When she came inside, Vance had coffee brewing. Real coffee, not the cold grounds from last night. The smell alone was enough to make Eleanor want to weep. Sit, he said, handing her a tin cup. Drink. Eleanor sat on the dirt floor and sipped the scalding coffee. It was bitter and perfect, and the best thing she'd tasted in months. Tomorrow we cross the Madison Range, Vance said, studying his map by firelight. It's exposed, dangerous in winter, but it cuts 2 days off our journey. Then we do it. Eleanor. Vance set down his cup. I need you to listen to me. Really listen. The Madison Crossing has killed experienced mountaineers. If a storm comes in, if we get caught on the high passes, we won't. You don't know that. No, Eleanor agreed, but I know I'd rather die trying to do the right thing than live knowing I gave up because I was scared. Vance's expression softened. You've changed since that first night at my cabin. You're not the same person. Is that good or bad? It's necessary. He poured himself more coffee. The world doesn't leave room for soft people. It grinds them down, uses them up. You either get hard or you break. I don't want to be hard, Eleanor said quietly. I don't want to be the kind of person who shoots people and runs and never trusts anyone. Then what do you want to be? Eleanor thought about it, about the woman she'd been in Boston versus the woman sitting here in a dirt floor hut drinking bitter coffee, about the choices that had led her from one to the other. I want to be someone who fights back, she finally said. Someone who doesn't just accept what powerful people decide is my fate. Someone who... She struggled for words. Someone who matters, who makes a difference. You already do, Vance said. You think Ashford's losing sleep over some shopkeeper he swindled? Over some farmer whose land he stole? But you took his secrets and you survived every attempt to silence you. You're the nightmare men like him can't control. The words settled over Eleanor like a weight and a gift combined. What about you? She asked. What do you want to be? Vance stared into the fire for a long time before answering. I want to be someone who chose right when it mattered, he said finally. Someone who stopped running from his mistakes and faced them instead. He looked at her. Maybe that starts with getting you to Helena. Maybe it starts with helping your brother. Maybe it's already started and I just didn't notice. Eleanor set down her coffee and moved closer to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Thank you, she said, for everything. For taking me in when you could have shut the door. For fighting when you could have run. For... Eleanor. Vance turned toward her, his pale eyes catching firelight. You don't need to thank me. I do, though. Because you didn't have to do any of this. You chose to, and that choice might have saved my life, but it definitely changed it. They sat in silence, shoulders touching, watching the fire burn low. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like breathing. The horse nickered softly in its makeshift shelter. Eleanor felt herself leaning closer, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. Vance didn't pull away. His hand found hers in the dimness, rough skin and old scars against her blistered palms. If we make it through this, Eleanor said softly, if we survive Helena and Ashford and everything else, would you really want me to come back to the mountain? Yes, Vance said without hesitation. Why? Because for the first time in 4 years, I don't feel alone anymore. His grip on her hand tightened. Because you look at me and see someone worth saving instead of just a killer. Because he stopped, seeming to struggle with something. Because I care what happens to you, more than I've cared about anything in a long time. Eleanor's breath caught. She turned to face him fully, searching his expression in the firelight. I care about you too, she said. I didn't expect to, didn't plan on it. But somewhere between your cabin and here, you became... She didn't have words for what he'd become. Partner felt insufficient. Friend seemed wrong. Something else, something more, something she was afraid to name. Vance reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he touched her face, his thumb tracing the scar on her cheek from that first night. We should rest, he said. But he didn't move. Neither did Eleanor. The kiss, when it came, was gentle and uncertain. Two broken people reaching for something good in a world that had given them mostly darkness. It tasted like coffee and exhaustion and hope. When they finally pulled apart, Vance rested his forehead against hers. Get some sleep, he whispered. We've got hard days ahead. Eleanor lay down near the fire, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Morning came cold and clear. They broke camp quickly, sharing the last of their supplies and mounting the tired horse. The Madison Range rose before them like a wall of white stone and ice. Eleanor's stomach clenched at the sight, but she didn't voice her fear. They started climbing. The going was brutal from the first step. The trail, if it could even be called that, was buried under feet of snow. The horse struggled, lunging through drifts that reached its chest. Twice they had to dismount and lead it through sections too steep or too narrow to ride. Eleanor's lungs burned in the thin air. Her vision kept sparking at the edges. But Vance pressed on with relentless determination, and she matched him step for step. They reached the high pass around midday. The view from the top was staggering, mountains in every direction, valleys carved by ancient glaciers. A landscape so vast and empty, it made Eleanor feel like the only person in the world. Look, Vance said, pointing north. Eleanor followed his gaze and saw them, riders, maybe a dozen, moving along the valley floor below. Too far away to pose immediate danger, but clearly searching. Ashford's really committed to this, she said. You stole his power. Men like him will burn the world down before they let that go unpunished. Vance studied the riders with narrowed eyes. But they're down there, and we're up here. If we can reach the far side before they figure out our route... A sound like thunder interrupted him. Vance's head snapped up. Run! What? Avalanche! Run! Eleanor looked back and saw the entire mountainside above them collapsing, a wall of white death roaring toward them. They ran. The horse bolted, terrified, leaving them on foot. Eleanor's legs pumped, carrying her down the far slope in leaping, desperate strides. Behind her, the roar grew deafening. Vance grabbed her coat and yanked her sideways into a depression in the rock face. They pressed themselves into the tiny shelter as the avalanche thundered past. So close, Eleanor could feel the wind it generated, could taste snow and ice in the air. The world turned white. The roar became everything. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence fell, broken only by Eleanor's gasping breaths and the settling of disturbed snow. You okay? Vance asked, checking her for injuries. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. They'd survived by inches, literal inches. They climbed out of their shelter to find the trail completely buried. The avalanche had swept away everything, the path they'd walked, the horse, their supplies. Everything except the lockbox, which Eleanor still had pressed against her ribs. Well, Vance said, staring at the devastation, we're walking from here. It took them 2 days to cross the Madison Range on foot with no food and minimal water. 2 days of Eleanor learning exactly how much the human body could endure before it quit. She stopped feeling hunger somewhere around the middle of the first day, stopped feeling cold that night. By the second morning, she was floating somewhere outside herself, watching her body move through sheer mechanical determination. Vance was the only thing keeping her upright, his hand on her arm, guiding her, his voice in her ear, telling her one more step, one more hour, one more ridge. They stumbled down the far side of the mountains into a valley where scattered homesteads dotted the landscape. The first farm they reached, a small operation with chickens and a milk cow, had a woman who took one look at them and brought them inside without asking questions. She fed them soup and bread while her husband rode for the nearest town. "You're in trouble," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Eleanor admitted. There was no point lying. "Bad trouble." "The worst kind." The woman nodded slowly. "My husband will be back with the sheriff in a few hours. You can rest until then." Eleanor wanted to argue that they couldn't wait, couldn't risk it, but her body had reached its absolute limit. She fell asleep at the table, head on her arms, still clutching the lockbox. She woke to voices. Vance arguing with someone. A man's voice answering, calm but firm. Eleanor forced her eyes open. Vance stood near the door, his hand on his pistol. Facing him was a man in his 50s wearing a star. The sheriff, the farmer's wife, had mentioned. "I'm not here to arrest you," the sheriff was saying. "Mrs. Hadley sent word that you need help. That's what I'm offering." "Why would you help us?" Vance asked suspiciously. "Because I've been getting telegrams all week about a woman named Eleanor Whitmore. Wanted for embezzlement, supposedly dangerous." The sheriff's eyes found Eleanor across the room. "But the thing is, I also got a letter from Judge Blackwood 3 days ago. Told me if Eleanor Whitmore showed up in my jurisdiction, I was to provide her safe passage to Helena. Said it was a matter of territorial importance." Eleanor's heart leaped. "Judge Blackwood knows we're coming?" "He suspected you might be. Said if the documents you're carrying are what he thinks they are, they could change everything." The sheriff stepped forward, hands visible and empty. "My name's Tom Reeves. I'm here to help you finish this." Vance looked at Eleanor. She nodded. "All right," Vance said, releasing his pistol. "But if this is a trap—" "It's not," Sheriff Reeves said simply. "I've known Aaron Blackwood 20 years. If he says you're on the right side of this, that's good enough for me." Within an hour, they were in a wagon heading for Helena with Sheriff Reeves and 2 deputies riding escort. Eleanor sat in the wagon bed, wrapped in blankets Mrs. Hadley had insisted she take, finally allowing herself to believe they might actually make it. "Almost there," Vance said quietly, sitting beside her. "I know." Eleanor looked at the lockbox in her lap. "What happens after? After we give Blackwood the documents? Then the law takes over. Arrests, trials, justice, if we're lucky. And us?" Vance was quiet for a moment. "I guess that depends on what you want." Eleanor thought about Boston, about the life she'd lost, about the woman she'd been versus the woman she'd become, about hiding on a mountain versus facing the world. "I want to find my brother," she said. "And then I want to go home." "Back to Boston?" "No, home." She looked at him. "The mountain. If the offer's still open." Something in Vance's expression softened. "It's open." They reached Helena at sunset the next day. Judge Blackwood met them at the courthouse, a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. He took the lockbox from Eleanor with reverent care. "You did it," he said simply. "I didn't think you would. I didn't think anyone could. But you did." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. Blackwood opened the lockbox and began examining documents with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Now I file federal charges. Wire Washington. Start bringing down an empire of thieves and murderers." He looked up at her. "This evidence is ironclad. Ashford and his associates are finished. And my brother, Caleb Whitmore? I already put out word through federal channels. If he's alive, we'll find him and bring him in safely." Blackwood set down the papers. "You've done more than save your own life, Miss Whitmore. You've potentially saved hundreds of people from being victimized by these men." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. She'd been running so long, fighting so hard, that the concept of it actually being over felt impossible to grasp. Vance's hand found hers and squeezed. "There's still the matter of the charges against you," Blackwood continued. "The embezzlement Ashford framed you for. I'll work to have them dismissed, but it will take time." "How much time?" "Weeks, maybe months. You'll need to stay in the territory, check in regularly with authorities." He paused. "Can you do that?" Eleanor looked at Vance, saw in his expression an answer to every question she'd been afraid to ask. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in the courthouse watching Jonathan Ashford being led away in chains. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence, But she saw the defeat in his shoulders, the knowledge that he'd been brought down by the woman he'd tried to destroy. Beside her, Vance stood silent and solid. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. "Like I can breathe again," Eleanor said. "Like I'm real again." The charges against her had been dropped the week before. Judge Blackwood had personally written the order, citing evidence of fraud and malicious prosecution. Eleanor Whitmore was officially a free woman. They left the courthouse and walked through Helena's streets without fear or hurry. Spring was coming to the mountains. Snow was melting in patches, revealing brown grass and the first hints of wildflowers. "Letter came this morning," Vance said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Federal Marshal found your brother. He's alive, Eleanor. Wounded, but alive. They're bringing him to Helena next week." Eleanor stopped walking. "Caleb's alive?" "Alive and asking for you." Vance handed her the letter. "Apparently he's been hiding in the mountains this whole time. Heard about what you did, about the evidence reaching Blackwood. He said to tell you he's proud." Eleanor read the letter through tears that wouldn't stop. Caleb was alive. After everything, after all the fear and uncertainty, her brother had survived. "We should get supplies," Vance said gently. "The cabin's going to need provisions for 3 people now." 3? "You, me, and Caleb. Figured he'd want to stay with us while he recovers. Unless you..." "That's perfect," Eleanor said, throwing her arms around him. "That's absolutely perfect." They spent the next week preparing, buying supplies, arranging transportation, making plans. Eleanor wrote Caleb daily, letters full of everything that had happened, everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. And when Caleb finally arrived, thin and scarred but smiling, Eleanor held him so tight he complained he couldn't breathe. "You climbed a mountain in a blizzard," Caleb said wonderingly. "You fought hired guns. You carried those documents across half the territory." "I had help," Eleanor said, looking at Vance. "Still," Caleb said, "my little sister. I always knew you were tougher than people gave you credit for." They left Helena on a morning when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. 3 people in a wagon loaded with supplies, heading north toward the Bitterroot Mountains, toward home. The journey took 5 days, but it felt different this time. Eleanor wasn't running, wasn't afraid. She was choosing this path, this destination, this life. When they finally reached Vance's cabin, Eleanor stood looking at it and remembered the terrified woman who'd arrived here months ago. That woman had been running from everything. This woman was running toward something. "What do you think?" Vance asked. Eleanor looked at the cabin, the forest, the mountains rising beyond. Looked at her brother, alive and healing. Looked at the man who'd risked everything to keep her safe. "I think it's perfect," she said. They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Caleb recovered slowly, his strength returning day by day. Eleanor learned to hunt, to track, to read the forest the way Vance did. She became someone who belonged to the mountains instead of someone hiding in them. Word came occasionally from Helena. Ashford and his associates had been tried and convicted. The stolen lands were being returned to their rightful owners. The corruption that had rotted the territory for years was finally being rooted out. Eleanor's name had been cleared completely. If she wanted, she could return to Boston, reclaim her old life. She didn't want to. One evening, as summer turned the high meadows green and filled them with wildflowers, Eleanor and Vance sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Do you ever regret it?" Vance asked. "Giving up your old life?" Eleanor thought about it honestly, about the comfort she'd lost, the security, the certainty of civilization. "No," she said, "that life, it wasn't really mine. I was playing a part, being who people expected me to be. This is the first time I've ever felt like myself." "And who is that?" Eleanor smiled. "Someone who survived, someone who fought back. Someone who learned that strength isn't about never being afraid, it's about being terrified and moving forward anyway." Vance took her hand. "I'm glad you climbed my mountain." "So am I." Later that night, with Caleb asleep inside and the stars wheeling overhead, Eleanor stood at the edge of the clearing and looked down at the valley below. Somewhere out there was the world she'd left behind. Cities and society and all the rules about who she should be. But up here, on this mountain, she'd found something better. She'd found herself. She'd found people worth trusting, worth fighting for, worth building a life with. The The frontier had tried to break her. Instead, it had forged her into someone stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Eleanor Whitmore, proper Boston secretary, was gone forever. In her place stood someone new, someone who could survive blizzards and gunfights and impossible journeys, someone who'd looked at corruption and said no, someone who'd chosen love over fear, community over isolation, fighting over running, someone who had finally, after months of searching, found her way home. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Vance stepped out, moving to stand beside her. "Ready to come inside?" he asked. Eleanor took one last look at the valley, at the world below that no longer held any power over her. "Yes," she said, and turned toward the warm light spilling from the cabin, toward family, toward safety, toward a future she'd fought tooth and nail to claim. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy. And now, for the first time in her life, Eleanor knew exactly where she belonged.